Chapter 1. The Bell at Dusk. Elias Krieg rode into Krovenheim under a slate sky, the low fog draping the timbered houses like funerary shrouds. His horse's hooves clopped on damp cobbles, echoing through empty streets that seemed to hold their breath in his wake. He dismounted outside the abbey gates. The ancient stones were slick with moss, the wooden doors scored with claw marks. A single torch flickered, casting quivering shadows across the lintel. Above him, the bell tower loomed, silent. Yet Elias could feel the weight of its presence. A novice approached, clutching a rosary. His face was pale as chilled clay. "Brother Krieg," the youth whispered, voice cracking. "They're summoned. The bell rings every dusk, but no one pulls the rope. And 3 are dead." Elias nodded. "Show me." They entered as dusk fell. Bells tolled from within, booming through his chest like the pulse of a funeral drum. The tower's belfry remained empty. The rope hung slack beside the rope wheel, coiled and still. No wind, no bell ringer, only the relentless tolling. Elias touched the bronze bell. It vibrated beneath his fingers, a low hum beneath the upper register. Coldness spread through his hand. He recoiled. The novice led him into the open cloister. Candles lined the walkway, burning low, their flames smoke-stained. On the lowest step stood a figure, one of the monks, but it wasn't breathing. Elias knelt beside him. The brother's throat had been slit deep, an ugly crescent carved with steel. His eyes were gone, 2 smooth sockets weeping open crimson rivulets which dripped across the marble, a quiet testament to violence. The bell tolled again. "Father Anton," said the novice, voice small as a broken twig. Elias rose. He pressed his blade into his palm. Reserved, unyielding anger filled him. "Where are the others?" Celis and Mirren, the novice shook. They were taken from their cells last night." They burst into the dormitory. The air reeked of stale sweat and fear. 2 cells at the end stood empty, bars twisted outward. Their straw piles scorched, blackened circles scorched into the floor, as though someone had stood there in molten light. A single candle in each melted to half stump. Blood, it thin and dark, traced from both cells through the corridor, leading to the chapel door. Elias followed. It opened into the nave, and the bell tolled its final toll, crescendoing, then cutting off like a snapped branch. Inside stood Inquisitor Carden, robes drenched in mud and mist. His expression was both relief and dread. "You heard it, then," Carden said. "I thought I fetched you too late." Elias sheathed his sword. Carden held a blood-spotted candle lantern and waved him forward. 3 bodies knelt before the altar, a Celis, Mirren, and a scribbling monk. Their wounds were precise, each throat cut and eyes removed. Their hands bound behind them, palms annoyed into prayer forever. Their robes were soaked in crimson and holy water. Above them, the carved wooden statue of Sigmar wept, red sap oozing from splintered wood, pooling at the feet of his effigy, brought alive in sacrilege. Carden swallowed. No sign of ritual magic, but the dedication. This is intentional, a message. Elias closed his eyes. He smelled oil, sweat, blood, and something else. A corrosive tang racing the back of his throat. He knelt beside the bodies, lifting one dead hand. Under the fingernails, odd dust, lighter than ash. He sniffed it. Charred bone. He stood. The bell. It tolls under its own power. The rope isn't pulled. The bodies, each at dusk. This is purposeful. Something in the walls, or beneath them. He placed a hand on the oak altar. The stone beneath throbbed like a living thing. Elias rose, turning to Carden. "I will find the hand behind this. Whatever cloaked it in fate, I will bring it into the light." The final sound of the bell faded. Outside, twilight wrapped the abbey tighter. He stepped into its shadows. Chapter 2. First to Fall. The cellar stairs groaned under Elias Krieg's weight as he descended into the abbey's undercroft. Damp stone pressed against his palms. The air grew colder, fouled with rot. No bells rang to warn him this time, only the sound of his own breath, ragged and urgent. A torch-hand monk's procession flanked him, 6 faces pale with fear. Each clutched a rosary, trembling as August dew hissed from the walls. They reached Brother Varen's quarters, a small cell with a narrow window and a single bed. The heavy oak door had no sign of forced entry. The lock was unbroken. All silent save for a heartbeat in the dark. Elias slid inside first. The candle sputtered out. Darkness swallowed the room, but the red glow beneath the bed remained, a living flame on stone. He followed it, the soft scuff of cloth, then the body half hidden beneath the bed. Brother Varen lay on his chest, one arm reaching out as though still grasping for salvation. His vestments were tattered, saturated in warm blood. A hymn book lay in his other hand, its pages blood-soaked, corners curled and stiff from spilled, drying fluids. Elias knelt, feeling the red-stained pages on his skin, hymns twisted into gore. "Let us lay our sins." The words blurred, ink running into crimson pools. He rolled the body to examine the back. The robes parted. The monk's chest cavity was open, clean work. Ribs splayed aside like a bird in flight. His heart absent. No stump. No sign of ritual carving. Just a hole. He pressed a finger into the gap. It was cold. Dry. Lightning rattled the window. The candle in his hand shook, flame dancing. The chanting torch-bearers froze. "Not by beast," Elias whispered. "Too precise. Too surgical." Through the window, rain spat onto stone. Leaves rustled with hidden wind. He rose, lantern high. The hymn book against Varen's hand moved, flapped, a page turned by unseen breath. "Lifted up from death unto glory." A voice from the doorway, soft, unsteady. "Brother Hain." Elias straddled both monks. "He's been taken from this world," he whispered, "and someone wanted his heart in their palm." Hain swallowed. I heard chanting in the cloister at dawn." Elias narrowed his eyes. "By someone who knows the cloister. Someone with access." He set the bloodied hymn book aside, unopened. He lifted Varen's sleeve. Scalloped impression. A sigil burned into flesh. He leaned close, voice low. The same hollow sign. Thunder rolled like an echo of the first bell far above. A distant bell tolls. Elias looked toward the staircase. "Find anything missing, keys, robes, relics, everything matters." Brother Hain nodded, rigid. The other monks fled up the stairs, their habit cloaks trailing like severed wings. Elias traced a drop of blood across the floor to the threshold, pressing his boot into the stain. The blood held fast, dried, but resolute. He stepped back and glanced at the body. Brother Varen had died in prayer. Lightning flashed again. He saw the pale face of Varen turn toward the door, eyes open in silent accusation. Elias swallowed. "Someone worships death here," he said to the corpse. "Someone who understands fear and uses it." He closed Varen's eyes gently, then took the hymn book. Blood slicked his fingers as he wrapped it in cloth. Outside, the hooded torchbearers stood like statues. Elias climbed the stairs. A third bell tolled. He stepped into the corridor and whispered, "Time is sacred, but not for them. We hunt." Chapter 3. The Crows Wait. A raw wind whipped through the abbey grounds at dawn, bending saplings and rattling shuttered windows. Elias Krieg emerged from the cloister's shadow, footsteps echoing against ancient flagstones slick with rain. Each breath formed mist in the chill, mingling with the sulfuric tang of moss and decay. Above, black crows spiraled around the chapel tower so thickly their wings eclipsed the broken bell. Their cries were dozens of ragged glass-shattering notes, harbingers, guardians. As Elias advanced, they swooped, pecking robes, tearing skin, their talons striking like needles in living flesh. He stood tall, flamberge held ready. Several crows released talons before him, wounding his arm with sharp rakes. He jabbed with the pommel, blood spattering the flagstones. The birds fell, screeching. Their black feathers rained down like grains of death. Elias wiped the blade clean on his cloak. The crows circled higher, silhouettes against a bruised sky. He limped toward the chapel's base, where blade-thinned footprints ran to the altar steps. By the steps lay a single crow's feather, its tip soaked in dark viscous matter. Elias knelt for examination. Pitch, thick, black, scented with resin and sulfur. It stank of hearth fire and tomb vapor, fresh enough to smear. He dipped a fingertip, rolled the sticky droplet. Binding agent, he muttered darkly. Used to reinforce feathers, ritual or ward. A twig snapped beneath him. He spun. Brother Hayne stood, face pale beneath hood. "It hurts them to come here," Hayne whispered, voice ragged. "Attacking the faithful is no test of divine judgment," Elias replied, pressing the feather between finger and thumb. "This is contrived." They climbed the altar steps. The bell rope swung, as empty as the bodies below. Pitched crows cawed from the tower slit, their shadows dancing on fractured glass. Elias ascended the tower door, rusted irons squealing. The narrow stairs spiraled upward through darkness rotted by centuries. Halfway, another feather lay spindled across a step. He paused, hand tightening on the grip. Above, the crows felt close, suffocating. A rotted floorboard creaked. He advanced with measured steps. Water dripped from above. He emerged beneath the bell. Torchlight revealed scorch marks around the clapper. The rope that once pulled it was frayed and severed. The pivot rusted, forced to swing on its own. Black pitch coated the clutch gear, dripped onto Elias's boots, and around the bell's base he found a carving in the iron. Oh, the hollow sigil. Elias wiped his blade across the bell's rim. "They prepare. An omen." He slid down the stair as the bell tolled, a low groan, dragged as if by invisible hands. The tower trembled. Brother Hayne staggered when Elias returned. "Feathers! Pitch! The symbol! They forced even the dead god to herald their cruelty." Elias stared skyward as the last crow clawed past the tower slit and vanished into roiling clouds. He wiped rain from his brow, blood from his arm. "They wait for a signal," he said, "and we stand in its light. We've seen their prayer. They've struck the bell to announce their presence. The real hunt begins tonight." He sheathed his blade. Hayne fell silent. The crows still circled above, harbingers in motion, scales of shadow, and Elias heard them as drums calling him onward. Chapter 4. Whispers in Cloysters. The abbey's cloisters gleamed under a cold, shifting light as Elias Krieg entered, lantern in hand. Monks moved between arches, faces drawn tight with unrest. Their chants had fractured, replaced by soft murmurs and glances over their shoulders. Elias stopped a novice named Peter. The boy trembled so violently his habit rattled. "What do you remember of Brother Varen?" Elias asked, voice low. Peter shook his head. I was asleep. I woke and the blot of silence was gone. Elias pressed on. "What did you see?" "I see him," the boy stammered, eyes unfocused. He walks in the halls, pale, empty eyes, his heart missing. He looks at me." Elias frowned, reassured the boy, but noted the way his lip quivered. Other monks nearby stumbled, searching the ceiling, clutching walls, blinking in confusion. Elias guided them into the surgeon's hall, away from passageways. He hammered a persuasion. Each monk described collapse, blankness, loss of prayer, forgetting names, forgetting vows. The hallucinations grew consistent, flickers in the candlelight, half-seen shapes at the cloister's edges, the dead stepping from catacomb doors. One monk, Brother Lem, collapsed, clutching his head. "They whisper," he groaned, "stealing me. I cannot pray. They took the taste." Blood trickled from his nostrils. Elias knelt and held the monk's hands, pressing thumb over pulse. "You'll live," Elias promised. A god burst in. "Another sighting, Brother Mirren," he gasped, panic sharpened in his voice. They ran, torches swinging. Shadows leaped between arches. They found Mirren kneeling at the foot of the crypt stairs, completely calm. No guard would have thought him alive if not for the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was muttering, "Names. Fill the lines." Elias gripped his arm. "Virgin Saint, forgive us, Mirren. You are alive." The monk looked up, flashes of awareness flickering as though out of reach. His knees buckled, spine arching as though lightning struck him. "Brother Varen," Mirren said softly. He needed his hymn book back. A soft sound, pages rustling, echoed down the corridor. The monks froze. A hymn book lay mid-air, spinning slowly, pages rustling in a wind no candle stirred. Elias advanced with flamberge. The book stopped turning. It fluttered toward Mirren, who recoiled. The book landed, its pages open to the familiar psalm, "Let us carry our dead in prayers." Words submerged in crimson as earlier. Mirren snarled, voice deepening. "Bring them. The hollow ones. Crow-feathered death. They will come again." He charged forward, his hands splattered in blood. He grabbed the book, soiled it, and tore into its spine. Pages ripped, spilled red. The monks screamed and fled, forming a pack in the cloister. Elias lunged and stopped Mirren, hearts pounding. He disarmed him. A candle tipped. Flame burned Pass's robe. Fire hissed. A brazier's embers wavered. Elias held Mirren on the ground. Mirren wept with rage and terror. "He walks here. The dead monk. He walks." He spat blood. "They sing his psalm. At bell-tolling hour." The lantern flickered. The hallway door rattled, though no wind blew. A distant clang, like a book falling, echoing from the chapel above. Elias looked to the empty corridor, then at Mirren. The boy's skin seemed drawn tight to bone, life blinking in arctic glaze. He rose, silence stretching taut. "We do not leave this cloister tonight," he said. "We hold vigil, and we will see what walks." He ordered the monks sealed in the refectory. He took 2 acolyte guards and Mirren, pinning the boy between them as he led them to the chapel. A single wisp of chanting echoed down from above. Inside, the coal-stone pulpit was empty, but atop it lay the hymn book, dripping with fresh blood, pages fluttering in the drafts of a candle long snuffed. The monks cowered. Elias glared at the book. He closed his fist, and the bells tolled as dusk took hold. "They come tonight," he thought, and he pulled his blade free. Chapter 5. The Face in the Font. Dawn had not yet broken when Elias Krieg pushed open the cathedral's heavy doors, the hinges crying out like the souls of the damned. The early hour cast pale shafts of light through the stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with muted, broken colors. Every footstep echoed with reverence, and something darker. The air was thick with the tang of incense, dust, and something sour, something painfully human. He carried a lantern, its weak glow revealing canonical symbols carved into pillars and the stone baptismal font at the center of the nave. The font's basin brimmed with holy water, still and black in the lantern light, until Elias knelt, peered inside, and recoiled in horror. A face floated on the water's dark surface, human, male, eyes wide open yet vacant. The flesh was taut, sharpened at the edges as though filleted from its skull and stretched like vellum across a sculptor's form. No hair remained. The scalp was smoothed back, an unbroken canvas. The lips had been sewn shut by coarse mortar, and along the forehead and jaw letters had been branded, burnt into the flesh in a trembling, uneven script. No prayer can sleep. The letters wept a black ichor that drifted across the water, thick as ink. Elias gagged, his stomach convulsing. He tore back, drawing his cloak across his mouth as the man's eyes seemed to follow him, accusatory and eternal. Beyond the font, the moonlight shivered against the marble. The hive murmur of distant chanting drifted from below, soft, lilting. A psalm, twisted into something obscene. Elias climbed to his feet, blade drawn. His boots sank in darkened water that leaked from the font, holy water turned blood-weak. The face bobbed, nose tipped upward. A chunk of mortal tissue, torn from someone once alive. Moments earlier, flasks of holy oil had stood at this font's rim. Now every one lay broken, spines snapped, skins cracked. Each had spilled across sacred stone, the oil mingling with the ichor in swirling red pools. Elias tasted copper when he stepped forward. The chanting grew louder. Elias followed the sounds toward the confessional booth near the altar. A monk knelt within, shaking, chanting a broken hymn with eyes closed. The booth's door was shut. He raised his lantern. Inside, the air smelled of damp confessionals and fear. He called out. The chanting stopped abruptly. Silence pressed the walls together. Elias drew closer, saw movement. Something slithered. Not words, but breath, forced out, broken. Then the door burst open. The monk stumbled out, hands clawing at his throat, blood drooling from under his tongue. His eyes were cloudy. He fell to his knees before Elias, scraping his forehead across the stone floor in jerking, twitching bows. "Forgive me." His voice was a rasp, raw with strain. "They forced me. Saw them. In the water." He pointed behind his head. Elias stepped back, searching. He turned. The font's basin was empty. Blood-soaked water drained through a carved spout into the hidden catacombs. And where the face had floated, nothing remained. Instead, the basin offered a faint, watery reflection of Elias's own ghostly face, lit only by lantern. Elias closed his eyes, suppressing bile. He crushed the brand-marked hymn book against the font's edge, blood spattering across the marble, clinking like brittle glass. The letters on his knuckles smudged black. He spat. A new scream echoed from deep below, a red guttural slash of pain, and the confessional monk's face exploded into whimpering shapes. He staggered and collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Elias cursed. Holy water, God's essence, had been transformed into a vessel for murder. The font, once a symbol of baptism and blessing, had become a macabre altar. He left the cathedral in hurry, tying off his cloak and slapping his blade's pommel. Outside, the morning fog pressed against him, damp and unforgiving. No streetlights had been lit. The town was still asleep, or afraid to wake. He thrust his blade home. "We're deeper than bones, darker than ritual," he whispered to the wind. and he headed toward the crypt entrances beneath the choir stalls, where water, blood, bone, an old lie flowed into darkness. Chapter 6. The Psalm of Hunger. The abbey's refectory lay silent but for the echo of dripping water and the constant hungry strain of flies. Hour upon hour had passed since dawn, yet this great hall of piety and prayer had become a mausoleum. Elias Krieg entered under the vaulted timber ceiling, each step cracked boards and flickered torchlight across overturned tables and broken benches. The long communal table had been pulled aside, its grooves stained red and brown. 5 chairs lay tipped over, legs broken, as though thrown by desperate hands. Under the closest window, shards of stained glass lay in the dust, emerald and ruby hues now dulled by soot and blood. On the floor, the corpse of novice Gerald seemed to broach 2 worlds, life and obliteration. His eyes were glassy, unseeing, but the dead pupil lay beneath one cheek, pulled out to leave a sunken eye socket staring at nothing. His mouth had been savagely cut wide and crudely re-sewn with braided strands of sinew. Raw communion bread had been packed into the wound, pressing between lips like a grotesque sermon. His ribs had been shattered. It looked as though a fist had been thrust through the front of his chest, crushing the bone and collapsing the lung. The clean tear of flesh around the wound betrayed an expert blade wielder, but the hatchet blow to the chest came out without technique, a blow of rage. A smear of broken crust and viscera decorated the wall. Elias dropped to one knee, lantern held close to illuminate the gristle and marrow that winked in displaced clutter. The smell was thick, stale bread fermenting in blood, undercut with death's rot. He raised a leather-gloved hand to cover his mouth, suppressing a retch. At the same moment, a low tremor shook the hall, as if the stones themselves had heard the abomination and recoiled. Elias let the lantern swing. Beneath the corpse, scrawled in crimson across the floorboards, words appeared, satiated by saintly bread, each letter careful, deliberate, trailing to the iron-bound door. He stood, turning eyes to the shattered window through which moonlight leaked, a lattice of silver twisting with jagged glass. From outside, the scent of rain and earth assaulted him. It felt like a taunt, the world washing itself as a single boy was butchered in God's name. He followed the blood-smeared line toward the far corner where tables lay in loosening heaps. A clatter, a spoon fell, broke the silence. Elias drew his flamberge. The lantern revealed the butcher. A robed figure knelt, Brother Cain, the refectory's steward. He sat cross-legged, face nearly consumed by hunger and shadow, staring at his dead charge. His hands were shaking, tiny drops of blood falling from his fingertips onto the communion bread lying before him. He reached toward a chunk of raw loaf crust smeared with viscera. Elias crushed the lantern's glass to the floor. Light shattered, flames guttered, and the monk's face jerked upward. Elias strode forward. "What have you done?" he demanded, voice like black gravel. Brother Cain met his gaze, unblinking. "He ate," the man whispered, lips slack. "He took the offering, but it would not fill him. So we starved him." Elias ground his teeth. Bones snapped under armor plates as he stepped nearer. The steward dropped the loaf, darting toward the door. Elias lunged, flamberge slicing arc across the shoulder, cleaving bone and flesh. Hot blood spurted across the lantern's dying flame, sizzling as it met spilled oil. Cain collapsed onto broken benches. He gasped, eyes wild. The raw wound on his back glowed dark. Elias pulled back, pressing boot to the monk's throat. "Tell me," he hissed. "Why?" Cain coughed, sputtering on his blood. It wasn't him. He couldn't. So I spoke the psalm of hunger. I chanted it over the bread, awakened the need. He became the vessel. Elias released him, away from the corpse. He watched Cain's chest rise shallowly. The still laughing fly buzzed, weaving through Cain's beard. The steward's breath rattled. Elias stepped over the body of Gerald, trailing a lantern beam over his blotted habit. He crouched at the boy's feet, took the sewn jaw in hand to rotate the head. He saw 2 small puncture wounds at the sides of the mouth, painful gouges to fit the crust. The raw bread had been forced freshly into the wound, an offering and a curse. He returned his gaze to Cain. Who taught you that chant? Who gave you the psalm? Cain's eyes unfocused as something in the door's shadow flickered. Cain laughed, low and wet. They sing it. At twilight they gather, in the crypt, with the hungry ones. The psalm is hunger, and hunger is the road. Elias snarled, stood straight. He kicked aside the shattered lantern. Flame licked leftover oil. The room caught fire. Wood smoldered, reaching upward. Sparks erupted. Wood groaned. The flames consumed detritus and dripped to the bone-smeared floor. The steward, a mortal husk of ignited revelation, staggered back. Elias drew pistol. A snap. The monk collapsed, blood arching. The fire swallowed the hall, red tongues sliding across benches. Elias grabbed a stool, smashing windows to allow fresh air in. He slid down the stone wall and edged toward the door. Beside the charnel table still lay a chalice, still bearing bread, soaked in blood. He pitched it into the flames. Oil flared. Alarms echoed down the cloisters. 40 bells rang in halftime, a dirge tune summoning all. Elias stepped out through collapsing doors as fire bloomed behind him, burning benches and bones. The abbey's chanting grew fainter with each toll. He mounted Marrow, armor scorched. The flames illuminated the maiden walls, and black banners fell like raining ashes. He rode off, carrying a burned chalice by its stem, a fragment of twisted faith between his fingers. In the distance, he heard the psalm echo, soft refrain carried on the night wind. Hunger is the life that cleaves the soul, and Elias heard its whisper beneath his ribs. Chapter 7. The Confessors Ledger. Moonlight filtered through fractured stained glass and pooled onto the worn flagstones of the abbey's inner sanctum, where Elias Krieg stood with lantern in hand, the acrid aftermath of fire still lingering in his nostrils. Smoke curled through the air, waning but persistent, carrying whispers of death and confession. All around, the sacred smell of incense had been poisoned. Charred wood, spilled blood, and fear mingled in a dark harbinger. Ahead, the heavy door to the confessor's private study lay ajar. Elias pushed it open. It creaked in protest, revealing a room of scholarly ruin. Books flayed open on a desk, ink pots shattered, parchment littering the floor like dead leaves. The confessor's chair was tipped back, its carved arms gouged with claw marks. Candles lay in pools of congealed wax, extinguished, their wicks blackened and glinting like tiny charcoals. Elias swept the lantern over the chaos, a half-burnt rosary missing all its beads, a shattered crucifix flung across the wall, and in the center, an oak desk, carved with the same hollow sigil scrawled across other scenes of horror. He stepped forward, careful not to disrupt what remained, crouching to examine the charred edges of a leather-bound volume caught beneath fallen books. He pried it free. It was heavy, sealed with a tarnished brass clasp engraved with a boat rudder shape, the sign of the confessor's order. He pressed his thumb to the latch. It gave with a painful screech. The book fell open to a double-page spread, densely handwritten in the confessor's neat script, margins scrawled with shorthand notes and tiny sigils, darkened streaks marking where tears had stained the page. Elias leaned in. Day of Ascension, year of the 6th horn. We achieved communion, though flesh failed. I offered the 7th psalm in candlelight beneath Brother Lawrence's corpse. He stood, eyes empty as ruin. His mouth spoke words not my own. A swell of revulsion washed over Elias. He swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "Communion with the dead," he muttered. "Rituals beneath the catacombs." He turned the page. 23 bodies buried last week, all stolen from their graves under the new moon. Night beneath stone we sang the rites of Brother Enoch. The dead hunger, they give us words, we give them death in exchange. That name, Brother Enoch, was one he recognized from whispered rumor, a monk who had vanished decades ago, rumored to have delved too deep into forbidden psalms, consumed by his own faith until no one dared speak his name. Elias flipped further. Through Enoch's psalms I see the path. They who wait beneath catacomb arches will rise. First the bell tolls, then the chanting begins. The dead shepherd leads the flock, and they answer the hunger. Elias raised his lantern, the thin beam trembling over the ledger's margins. He scanned the last entries, ink blurred by tears. I believe the confessor is the lantern. The ledger is the map. The ledger must burn. But, Elias paused. A ledger, so meticulous, was more than confession. It was evidence. He closed the book, his fingertips tracing the branded sigil on the cover. He pried open a desk drawer. Inside lay vellum scrolls, signed with confessor's seal, invitations to secret vigils beneath the cathedral, addressed to high-ranking clergy, local magistrates, and nobles, none of whom had ever been publicly linked to this abomination. A single scroll, folded in half, dropped from his hand. He caught it. Unfolded it. To Brother Aldrich, steward of Albrich's twins, you will see the truth tonight. Be at the crypt's eastern entrance. The dead have answers. His heart thundered. The circle was widening. Rituals involving powerful men creeping into the heart of religious authority, all referencing the same dead monk. The ledger confirmed it. This was no random cult. This was a conspiracy seated in holy authority, built from lust for dominion over death. Grinding noise echoed behind him. Elias spun. The door closed. Candlelight flared as wind snuffed the lantern, and the room plunged into gloom. Then he saw it. Symbols carved into the wood floor that had not been there moments before. A ring of runes, 5 points, encircling the book. A charcoal circle smudged with black pitch that radiated corruption. He trailed off. His blade, no inked line, gave warning, but when he raised his weapon, he caught the flash of movement behind the desk. He lunged. A figure stumbled from shadow. Brother Aldrich, gaunt and pale, blood seeping from fanged wounds across his throat. He snarled, lunging forward, teeth bared, but human no longer. The confessor attacked with fanatic speed, clawing for the book. Elias knocked him away, rasping breath and wet flesh brushing cold steel. Aldrich sprang back, clutching his throat. Droplets of blood flashed in the moonlight, murdered victim thirsting again. They circled in the dark. Elias pressed forward. Aldrich flinched, knife-length scar flashing on his wrist from struggling with the confessor's clasped rosary. Elias attacked. Aldrich dodged, sweeping a blow that split his sleeve. Elias struck again, cold steel biting into muscle, carving a wound that split a prayer mid-scream. Aldrich staggered, clutching his bleeding side. He hissed, as if possessed by countless lost voices. Elias held him by the throat, pressing the flamberge's point to bone. "Where is the ledger, Brother Enoch?" he demanded, voice roaring. "Where is your coven, buried beneath the stones?" Aldrich coughed, blood bubbling. He twisted his head, brow lifting weakly. Beneath the crypt, east exit, they..." His eyes clouded. He collapsed, flesh collapsing to bone. Elias released him, breathed steaming in the cavernous stillness. He retrieved the ledger and the scroll. He draped each in oil-soaked cloth. He set them ablaze on the desk. Paper hissed. Pages turned to ash as the flame consumed secrets and sacrifices alike. Smoke rose in ragged spirals, dragging charred embers into the loft. Elias snuffed the fire, smothering the blaze in the broken rosary. He backed to the door and left the study, lantern low and senses alight. Beneath the abbey, through shifting corridors and bone-carved crypts, he followed the confessor's last directions. East exit leads to the catacombs, where the dead speak through hunger's psalm and Brother Enoch's ghost waits for his choir. Outside, the moon had waned to a curved scythe of silver above the abbey walls. Fog had thickened. The air seemed to press forward in laboring breaths. Anticipation. Elias mounted marrow. The pages behind him burned to charcoal. The truth, once whispered in parchment, now glowed like a beacon to those who thirsted for death. He rode north, the wind swollen with omens and memory-laden darkness, heading toward the crypt that held the murderers and their dead god, Brother Enoch. Chapter 8. The Blood Beneath Stone. Moonlit mist clung to Elias Krieg's shoulders as he eased himself down the spiral stair into the catacombs below Krovenheim Abbey. Every step descended deeper into ancient, damp bone and dark masonry, the air growing colder and saturated with the stench of earth and decay. Torchlight illuminated skeletons lined in niches, skulls gazing like empty witnesses to the horrors above. Elias passed broken pottery and rusted relics of past worship, his lantern catching ancient runic carvings in the stone, worn symbols of Sigmar, cracked and interrupted by fresh gouges forcing them into inverted mockeries. The weight of desecration pressed on him, a physical force that made his gut knot. Finally, the passage opened into a vast vaulted chamber, where the scent of iron grew heavy. At its center stood a dais of shattered marble, carved once in reverence, now re-etched in blasphemy. Inverted hammers and broken comets wrenched into the stone with furious intent. A shallow pool at its base shimmered unnaturally, rippling though nothing fell upon it. Elias knelt beside the water's lip. Bubbles rose and burst on the surface, droplets of half-liquid blood that never coagulated, never dried, yet throbbed with life of their own. Each bubble sent out a wet snap that echoed the drips of water hitting skulls in distant recesses. Elias's breath came ragged now as he probed around the altar with gauntleted fingers. He found jagged iron shards and bone fragments embedded into the masonry, arranged in a precise circle. Beneath each shard was a charcord, blackened torches extinguished since the last sacrifice. His lantern beam illuminated the silhouettes of subordinate carcasses. Scorched scraps of flesh still clung to rib cages laid around the dais, positioned as if frozen in final prayer. The floor was sticky, each step leaving half a shoe print behind, as though the stone had sucked at his soul. Somewhere behind him, a soft sigh hissed between shadows. He pivoted, blade drawn, but found nothing. Only more altar stones, bearing stains that looked like handprints reaching for escape. He stood, lantern low, and uttered a prayer he didn't believe. Above the dais, etched into the vaulted ceiling, the hollow sigil glowed faintly with flickers of red phosphorescence, a latent curse not yet quenched. Then, sharp metal dragged against stone from deep inside the chamber. Elias pressed forward, blade in one hand, pistol in the other. He followed the sound to a bricked-off alcove. At its center was a slit, just enough to force a forearm through. Without hesitation, Elias shoved his hand in. It closed around bone, the piece of a femur. Blood oozed through his gauntlet and ran hot across his skin, but the arm of the alcove pushed forward, pulled him forward. He staggered, but kept hold. A cloaked figure stepped from behind the dais, slick with the same fluid, hooded and limbed in the dim phosphor. "It calls," it rasped, voice echoing off vaulted walls. "Brother Enoch calls through the stone. Answer!" Elias felt rage rise and cold seep through his bones in equal measure. He seized the stranger's hood, yanked it back, revealing flesh drawn tight, eyes the color of ash. "You desecrate his name!" Elias roared, bringing his flamberge down. The blade bit through flesh and sinew with a wet, meal-like sound. The cultist's eyes flew open in surprise, then death. He staggered, the blood beneath him hissing where it touched torches. He fell, crushing skull fragments, and the chanting erupted, dozens of voices, hollow and unseen, filling the chamber with echoing psalms, praising Enoch's hunger, the stone's blood, the feast beneath faith. Elias slashed the pool's surface 3 times, each cut sending back ripples of burgundy, each a sacramental strike. He stepped back, lantern tremoring in his grip. As the cultist dropped, the chanting stopped. Silence returned, dripping and oppressive. Elias steadied his breath, lifted his lantern, and with measured calm whispered, "I will neither feast nor pray here." He climbed from the catacombs, abandoning the bubbling pool, certain that in the wrong hands corruption lived, and tonight it nearly spoke through stone. Chapter 9. 3 faces in the wall. The cold wind purred through midnight corridors as Elias Krieg descended from the haunted sanctum above, the lantern in his hand flickering against the damp stone walls of Krovenheim's deep catacombs. The air here tasted of earth and death, with each breath carrying the clean sting of moldy stone. He paused before the altar wall, its marble surface fractured by fresh cracks, subtle at first, but wide enough to reveal dark voids beyond. Elias knelt, tracing a glimmer of mortar running in unnatural angles. He gripped a small hammer from his belt and tapped a cracked brick. It broke away on his first strike, revealing nothing but blackness. With grueling determination, he pried masonry from masonry until a narrow tunnel yawned behind the altar, a passage hidden for who knew how long. Bone dust puffed into the air as he squeezed through. His lantern lit a corridor slanted with damp steel tracks and roots clawing dusty stone. Each step broke centuries, old debris. At the tunnel's end, the corridor widened into a crypt, lair-bathed in shifting lantern glow. And there, embedded in the wall, like abominations of devotion, 3 human faces stared forever outward. The first face was middle-aged and male, eyes wide with a frozen scream. Skin had dried tight against the skull, its texture cracked like aged parchment. Mouth bayed in silent agony, lips parted as though needing breath that would never come. The nose had collapsed inward, leaving gnarled cartilage, half metal before the stone, flesh whittled to marble hardness. His cheeks were sunken, cheekbones jutting like bared ribs of bone. Beside him, a second face, female, younger, eyes closed remorsefully. Dark-stained tears trailed from the corners of her eyes as though she still mourned in death. Her features were smoother, cheeks plump once, now singed and wood-like, hair strands petrified across her forehead like insect legs. The skin had been cut away in strips across the jawline, and those cuts had been sealed with silver wire, a grotesque wire-thread grin, veins severed and reattached for mysterious purpose. The third face caused Elias's breath to catch in his chest. High cheekbones, fine jaw, pale hair. Novice Gerald. His face was tethered to the wall by splintered wooden stakes punched through flesh, 4 nails driven into forehead and chin like a makeshift frame. His mouth sagged open, but rather than terror, his mouth was twisted in a grim parody of peace, an affront to life. Fresh blood seeped from his nose and mouth, trailing down the stone and dripping into a dark pool at the floor. The edges were slick and wet, congealing into a rust-like scab. Elias staggered forward, lantern shaking. He pressed his palm to the stone beside Jero's face, the rock cold and unforgiving. "Why are you here?" he whispered into the silent crypt. No answer came. Only the steady drip of Jero's blood, like a metronome of death. He dropped to one knee and closed Gerald's eyes with his finger. A sudden tremor coursed through the wall, rattling the lantern's flame. Elias looked back, his breath hitched when in the dim light he sensed movement. Shadows stirred behind him. Or perhaps shapes, in the lantern's half-darkness. Something low growled. He drew flamberge in a sweep. A figure lurched at him, shadowed, gaunt, body stiff. It struck with desperate speed. A cadaverous hand attempted to seize his blade. Elias backpedaled, planted his foot, and delivered a savage twist of the flamberge, shearing through bone and muscle. The figure collapsed in wet thunder, collapsing flesh onto the stone floor. Elias kicked the corpse back, his boot cracking rib shards. He turned to the wall again, heart hammering. He lifted the lantern close to Gerald's face for a final inspection. The wounds glistened bright, night-side reflection dancing across blood-traced vines on the face. He knelt again, pressed temples with both hands, vision blurring. "It's not just tongues through the tomb. It's faces pinned to stone," he murmured. A gallery of silence. He knelt in cold blood, recovering his calm. He reached into his satchel, pulling a small flask of holy water. He emptied it into the pool below Gerald. The liquid hissed against the blood with steam and sizzle, dispersing a foul stench. It ran cold, carving through the congealed surface, drenching the stake-pointed corpse face with sanctity. As he stepped back, lantern steady, "You will not speak through the dead," he said, voice low and final. He left the face gallery behind, sealing the broken masonry with heavy stones so that they would remain hidden but not forgotten. He ascended, resolve hardening like hammered steel. He would follow these answers upward through holy halls and fractured oaths until every mask had been removed. Outside, the bell above the abbey tolled midnight, and Elias rode into the storm, lantern lights fading as the rain grew heavier. Chapter 10. The Black Choir. A funeral hush lay over the abbey, as if the stones themselves held their breath. Elias Krieg stepped through the shattered arches of the choir loft, lantern in one hand and flamberge in the other. The sung psalm of hunger still echoed in his ears, a twisted dirge that had burned young Gerald's flesh into the wall. Now he followed a softer but more sinister melody, drifting from the shadowed crypt entrances below the sanctuary floor, a low chant in perfect harmony, yet laced with something else, something old, something alive. He crept down the narrow stairs of the pulpit, the chant growing louder, more controlled. Through the gloom, the voices divided into 4 tones, bass, tenor, alto, and soprano, circling him like worms in a wound. Candle sconces illuminated robed figures kneeling in a rough semicircle around a vase of human bone dust. The bones were laid out in the shape of a star smudged in black wax, an inverted symbol silenced of light, and below it, a shallow pit containing ash from previous sacrifices. The members' hoods were lowered, revealing hollow eyes and jaws clenched in reverence, as though their teeth held secrets no prayer could voice. At the center kneeled the eldest among them, Brother Ilian, the abbey's cantor, his face carved with the lines of time and fanatic devotion. His voice carried the lead tenor, clear and brittle as ice. Meanwhile, 2 novices intoned counterpoint, their voices cracked with devotion, as though feeding the slaughter. Elias advanced. The chanting fractured, but the song continued, unbroken. They did not turn, they did not waver. He stepped into lantern light. "Stop!" His voice echoed. The choir parted around him, standing as one, faces blank, eyes unseeing. Brother Ilian rose, robes pooling wetly in the stale incense. "You cannot stop the chorale," he said softly. His voice made the hair on Elias's neck shiver. "Without our song, the spirit wakes." He gestured to the bone star in the pit. Elias recognized a few charred vertebrae. His gaze flitted past them and the chanting priests. "What spirit?" Elias asked, voice grounding coil. Ilian's lips parted. "Brother Enoch," he whispered. "He lives beneath the stones. Without his psalms, the murder psalms, they rise. We sing to hold death's face back. Elias set down his lantern. You butchered brothers to get this chorus? The room trembled on those words. The choir responded in perfect liturgy. To sing is to hold is to bind. We bind, so he does not feed. Elias took a step forward. His blade sang out as he severed the bone-dust vase, watching the chalky fragments scatter. Elian flicked his hand, and the choir went still. Kill me, Elian challenged. Finish this. The robed men and women mirrored his posture, knees touching stone, heads bowed, chins raised. Annika appeared behind Elias, silence in her approach, gun trained on Elian's back. She fired, one crisp blast. Elian crumpled, spine splintered, skull parting in shards of bone and blood. Elian's knees buckled, temple cracking like pottery under pressure. With a shriek that was both human and something else, the choir sprang. Elias spun, flamberge flashed. He met the group's first assault. A novice lunged, blade aiming for his throat. Elias blocked and retaliated, steel carving through sinew with an ugly squelch, tendons snapping like knotted rope. Another fell under Annika's shot, eyes widening into bloody marbles ere collapse. Violence erupted. The sanctified floor became a massacre stage. Elias hacked through vestments, bodies hitting benches in broken arcs. Each flash of blade exposed blood-dark reflections from the stained glass above. Angels gargling in their frames, marble saints bowed. They bore witness. Annika's gun cracked again. A blade spun off barbed flesh as liturgy turned to war cries. Elias swung. A cultist's head snapped back, shoulders shuddering before collapse. The blood sprayed across slate, vines of red pulsing with malice. Yet the pit remained, bones intact, awaiting a new sacrifice. A final cultist sank to his knees, chest pierced, eyes clear as glass. Elias planted the flamberge's tip at his throat, pressing down. The singing ceased. He turned to the bone star and pit, wrote a prayer upon his lips that was no Sigmarite hymn, but something colder. He grabbed the charred bones and scattered the ash across the altar stone. With a stomp, he shattered the inverted star pattern, sending wax shards sliding like broken nails. Then he kicked the pit stone shut and stomped it into dust, bones and dust clattering, echoing down the crypts. Elias looked at the bodies. "You bound nothing," he whispered. "You imprisoned your own souls to feed a corpse's song." He ducked beneath the altar floor and slammed the iron grate, sealing off the crypt. The chants died. Smoke curled upward from fallen candles. The air cleared. Silence returned like a drawn breath. He exited the catacombs, passing shattered wood and bleeding stone. Outside, dawn cracked. The abbey exhaled its dust. No bells tolled, no crows circled. Only the distant drip of sanctified blood, no longer bound. Chapter 11. Voices from the Pulpit. The morning light slanted through the tall, fractured stained-glass windows of the abbey's grand nave, painting the stone floor in muted motes of red, gold, and sapphire. Under the fractured holy light, the congregation knelt in hushed devotion, faces uplifted in silent prayer. At the far end, behind the marble pulpit carved with angelic hammers and twin-tailed comets, Father Aldrich prepared to deliver the sanctified Mass. Elias Krieg stood at the rear aisle, arms folded over his dark cloak. His presence was like a wintry shadow, unnoticed, yet there. Beside him, Annika's quiet breathing was the only companion to the steady drone of incense burners swinging in ritual arcs. The air tasted of burnt frankincense and damp stone. Father Aldrich lifted the sacrament wafer high, proclaiming the words of consecration in a strong, resonant voice. A collective inhale seemed to echo through the vaulted ceiling as worshippers prepared to receive the holiest of gifts. But just as peace seemed to settle over the abbey, the voice from the pulpit shifted, a serrated crack cutting through the melody of prayer. Elena Fisher, you betrayed him, poisoned the Satsuma at dusk, the voice rasped, slicing across the kneeling congregation like a serrated blade. No pause, no hesitation. Names spilled forth: Brother Magnus, Sister Rila, Old Father Tom, each followed by accusations: secret lust, fraudulent charity, womb-piercing ritual, betrayal of blood. The congregation froze mid-prayer. Some hands clenched in horror. Those near the front rose in confusion. Father Aldrich's face contorted, lips moving though the voice emanated from elsewhere. His eyes remained blank, as though something else spoke through him. Elias strode forward, gut roiling as the voice continued. Elias Krieg, you wield the blade of treachery. You are the murderer of light itself. It paused, then drowned in a revelatory torrent. Detailed murder methods, not yet committed, stomach incisions, bone splitting, basilisk venom injections, mocking descriptions of slow, exquisite pain. Praters of hushed horror gasped. Some shrank back, clutching stunned children to their robes. A knight dropped his sword, head jerking as if seized by invisible hands. The tune of the mass wilted. Candles sputtered as though choking on the accusation. Elias forced his footing forward, arms braced at his sides as the voice honored his name with rippling contempt. The blade betrays his hand, the flame betrays his oath. The tone twisted between mocking lullaby and abandoned lunacy. The congregation wept. A woman collapsed, and the congregation knelt again in fearful confusion. The world felt on edge, fragile, like a turned blade ready to shatter. Elias rounded the pulpit. Annika reloaded her crossbow silently, her eyes fixed on the possessed priest. Father Aldrich still held the wafer, trembling, blood dripping from his temples where a sudden wound appeared. Flame-glistened tears streamed across his cheeks, molten as sacred resin. The wafer cracked like thin ice. Elias' hand clenched on his blade's hilt. He strode up the steps. "Stop this," he hissed. "End it." The voice surged again, louder, defying all sanctity. "Kill Magnus with midnight fire. Drink Ryla's marrow at dawn break. Let the sinners walk in your shadow, Brother Krieg. Let death be your confession." The world rewound. A single dead-eyed tear escaped Father Aldrich and landed on the wafer, now dripping crimson. The priest convulsed, mouth yielding back to his voice, choking, strangled. Elias shoved the priest, blade's pommel thumping against marble. The chanting voice shattered into static as if it suffered within Aldrich. The priest collapsed down the steps in a broken heap. Blood fountained from his eyes, ears, mouth, holy aubergine, painting the steps in sacred ruin. Silence slammed the nave into submission. The congregation recoiled. Some wept, others gasped. The candles guttered, leaving molten splotches in their sanctuary. Elias dropped down beside Father Aldrich. He turned toward the shattered congregation, voice heavy with grief. "No ritual, no oath, but sin begins with fear," he said, wiping the blood from the priest's forehead. His voice sank. "This abbey has hidden its death with its prayers, but you saw it. Must die." He straightened, and the knight nearest him set his jaw and lifted his fallen blade. Others followed. A choir of shaken guards formed. Annika hauled Father Aldrich to his feet, supporting him as he collapsed into fading awareness. Elias glared at the empty space above the pulpit. A darker presence lingered, an entity that whispered not just accusations, but commanded murder before the sin existed. The abbey's sanctuary had been hijacked by prophetic violence, a twisted mirror of confession and execution. He left the congregation to calm under Annika's watch. He strode down the nave aisles, past shaken faces, until he found the door to the pulpit's undercroft. His lantern lit the descent to sharpen terror below. He grasped the door and paused, because beneath that altar lay carved steps, and the voice of prophecy was etched with murder and damned by ink and bone. And tomorrow, if he did nothing, he would hear the bone echoes in his name again. Chapter 12. Enoch's Gospel. Midnight lay heavy over Krovenheim Abbey, a stillness so thick the stones seemed to hold their breath. Beneath the shattered altar of the choir, Elias Krieg crouched low, lantern in one hand, flamberge in the other. Blood splattered the flagstones above, souls in ruin. Below, something much older waited. He pressed a hidden latch in the stonework, and a section of floor shifted open, with gravel whispering into the void beyond. Light from his lantern danced along the narrow descent, cold stone steps slick with ice and moss, disappearing into smell of damp earth and rot. Elias moved carefully, every sense alert. Beneath centuries, each footstep whispered to ghosts. The staircase ended at a low vaulted cavern, the walls curved in, blackened by age and neglect. At its heart stood a stone lectern, carved with chipped runes that swirled like serpents across its face. On the lectern lay a single object, Enoch's Gospel. The volume was grotesque, bound in human skin, pale, yellowed, still faintly veined. Its spine was stitched with sinew, the stitches pucker over the rough hide. The cover bore a single word in scorched letters, Enoch. A hush fell, oppressive and ancient. Elias's lantern caught the stitching, a slow, deliberate visage traced by someone letting anatomical accuracy bleed into silent veneration. As his fingers hovered, the book, heavy with taboo, shifted slightly on its own. He swallowed. Something low and rumbling came from the cavern, resonance like distant chanting, but no wind or throat produced it. The Gospel opened, softly, page by page, as if read by unseen hands. Elias peered at the first lines, penned in a dark reddish-black ink, the script dancing on the page. This walked beyond the veil of bone. I have heard the buried hymn of flesh. I have known that death is our true beginning. The letters writhed faintly in his lantern light. He closed the book, the pages flipped shut and the cover snapped like a trap. But before he could gather himself, the subterranean walls trembled, a sound low and human, like laughter cut short by sorrow. Elias caught a flicker of movement, dusty shapes at the edge of vision, kneeling shadows so dark they swallowed the lantern's glow. As he lifted the book to inspect its next page, a whispered voice breathed from the darkness. The words, "They grow legs." Elias took a step back. The Gospel fell open again. This time, the next stanza, "Sing the psalms of blood. Let the marrow pulse in verse." For each stanza calls a dagger's edge. For each hymn, a severed oath. His throat tightened. The chamber latched its gloom around him. A scraped voice, a gathering hush, emerged. "All brother Krieg, you read his words, he reads yours." He lifted the Gospel resolutely. Its pages flipped again, as though eager to continue. He paused at a blank page, until sigils burned themselves into the parchment, black as obsidian, forming a circle of sigmarite inversion. He tilted the book to snuff the lantern in horror. He felt the Gospel pulse, thin as a heartbeat, but there inside the veins of leather and flesh. "You see us," whispered the darkness. "We sing for your fear." Elias winced. The Gospel had turned another page, crawling ahead of him. On it, illustrations, human hearts tethered by sinew to sigmarite hammers inverted. aborted strings of babies' bones laid out in psalmic script. It depicted a man wearing Enoch's face, singing inside a sea of corpses, mouths pried open wide enough to swallow choruses whole. Elias slammed the book shut. Lantern light sputtered. The underground growl crescendoed. Torchlight flickered along shadowed walls. Then, silence. Elias raised the lantern to the ceiling. Spiderwebs sagged. Water droplets paused overhead. He exhaled. The gospel did not slump, but looked at him, face up on the lectern. The stone felt alive beneath his knees. He placed his palms flat upon the lectern. His voice was tight. "Brother Enoch, may your psalms die with you." He crouched, flicked back open the gospel, one more page. Lines he could not suppress. And when the hunter folds his blade to sleep, the gospel hunts him with its teeth. He closed the book again with trembling hands, crossed himself, and placed it in his satchel. The stone shifted, as though acknowledging the passage. The murmurs died. The walls settled. He ascended the steps, torch abandoned, mind alight with winter memories. Each stone above thrummed like an open wound. He emerged beneath the shattered pulpit. Dawn had cracked. The abbey was still silent. Too silent. Elias tightened his cloak, hand on flamberge hilt. He spoke to no one but himself. "We cannot burn this. It gives voice to our sins. But we must bury it, keep it from speaking again." He walked toward the eastern wing. Every corridor echoed with possibility. The gospel's weight in his satchel pressed against his ribs like a heartbeat. And deep in the catacombs, the silent choir waited. Chapter 13. The Wake of the Fleshless. Night descended on Krovenheim Abbey with malignant intent, swallowing banister and bell tower alike in a tight, oppressive darkness that seemed to breathe its own malice. The candles in the nave flickered low, their meek flames casting shadows that quivered as though alive. The air trembled with the distant toll of bells, even though the rope hung limp and unused, a herald for horrors yet to come. Elias Krieg stood at the heart of the abbey's cloister, lantern held aloft like a fragile promise of light. His chest heaved with exhaustion, his cloak strewn with soot and blood. Annika stood beside him, crossbow readied, while desperate monks clung to the cloister walls, chanting prayers they no longer believed. The ground trembled beneath them, thud, thud, like a creature pacing just beyond sight. Then the first scream shattered the tension. It came from the crypt doors, a jagged scream, raw and guttural, pitched like an animal's cry. A dozen monks collapsed to their knees, ringing their rosaries frantically. Elias turned toward the thick stone doors, now quivering with unnatural force. The doors burst inward with deafening force. Moonlight spilled in, revealing a wave of shambling forms ascending the stairs. The murdered monks. Severed of flesh where faces should have been, the features were smooth, featureless flesh, cheekbones exposed, eyes and mouth erased in worship of blasphemy. Their chants, or what passed for chants, were low and discordant, psalms twisted into stabbing crescendos that ripped the air and vibrated within skulls. They emerged into the cloister, arms outstretched, howling their fractured hymns. Those murder psalms Elias had destroyed once, now resurgent in living terror. The psalms ruptured eardrums. Even the walls appeared to shudder under the weight of sonic violence. A monk collapsed behind wind-carved stone. Elias dashed forward, blades swinging. He severed the arm of a fleshless figure, and hot, fetid blood spurted, smell of rot and iron thick as stew. Its body didn't topple. It simply stood, blood leaking through and evaporating beneath moonbeams, turning the ground to steam around its feet. Annika fired. Her bolts punched through bone and sinew. The monstrosities dropped by dozens, but each fall produced two more staggering forms. Brother Varin, Brother Gerald, Brother Mirren, each one a hollow echo of life, unmade. Limbs tore through silk cassocks. Severed heads continued hissing psalms, as though moving on their own accord. The corridor became a cathedral of violence. Elias planted the feet of one fallen corpse, slid the blade between ribs, and drove the point into its heart. Bone splintered. He wrenched the flamberge free as the creature fell with a wet squelch, collapsing into the column they leaned against. Blood trickled down stone like malevolent prayer. Elias shouted to Annika, "Head for the belfry corridor, block the steps." They charged for the spiral stair. Fleshless forms surged behind them, pressing in like a wave of death. An ivied alcove exploded with stone when one corpse hurled itself toward them. Elias rammed elbows into its torso, cracking collarbones, shattering bone. The psalms thundered, "We feast in silence." "He reigns!" It thrust again, driving its head into Elias's ribs. Rib splinters stabbed his side. He gasped. Annika swung the butt of her crossbow and shattered its skull with feral precision. They reached the spiral stair. Elias heaved a fallen cultist torch onto the steps. Fire roared to life, the lash of flame roaring upward. Fleshless arms pulled at burning robes. The bodies erupted into banshee whispers as the fire consumed them. Their psalms twisted into agonized snatches of screaming fracture. Their chants bubbled into sputtering silence as flesh sloughed from bone. Smoke choked the stairwell. The stairs glowed crimson with blood and flame. They reached the upper gallery. The chanting roared up around them, a cathedral built of shrieks. The air seemed to pulse. Annika triggered her grenade. Sigmarite firestorm roared outward, concussive and holy. The blast collapsed the gallery railing. A wall behind them cracked and smoke spewed, the psalms drowning in roaring flame. They pressed on. The painted choir ceiling above them glowed as fire licked at gold leaf. The corpses advanced like a tide of drowned victims. Elias slashed through an advancing pair. His blade passed through rotting flesh and bone, shredding sinew in a hideous bouquet. Annika seized Elias's arm. "Enough! We pushed them back into the crypt." They positioned themselves at the threshold of a doorway leading to the catacombs. Elias pressed a bolt into the door, forcing an iron buckle, rolling logs of firewood behind it. Monks screamed outside, banging at the door frames. A dozen corpses loomed behind the flame-roasted wall. Elias struck the lock. Annika waited, crossbow braced. When the door sealed their path, arch-guardian flames lit the corridor. The fleshless monks retreated, melting into darkness. Their psalms soured, fractured into rumbling grunts. Silence fell. The dawn flame broke over broken tiles. Candles guttered out like spent souls. The body count was staggering. Narrow stone corridors littered with bodies, holy water mixing with blood and ichor. Elias knelt by the last pair of corpses. They lay face down. The psalms finally stilled, mouths still grimacing in final invocation. He closed his eyes. "Your prison is light," he whispered, "but your song leaves scars." He rose, blade shaking in his hand. Annika remained at his side. They stepped forward, deeper into the ruined cathedral, following the broken path of psalms and stone. Because beyond the shattered altar lay sanctuary, or the heart of hell itself. Chapter 14. The Judgment Psalm. Rubble and ash lay thick in the ruined chapel as Elias Krieg stepped between the shattered oak pews. Moonlight filtered through collapsed rafters, painting streaks of silver across cracked marble and broken stone. The aftermath of the fleshless uprising haunted the chamber. Scorch marks, pools of dried blood, and shattered stained-glass shards littered the floor in macabre fragments. A single candle guttered in the pulpit. its flame tremulous against the heavy silence that pressed through the rafters like a shroud. At the center of the altar stood Brother Elias, the cult's cantor and self-professed vessel of Brother Enoch. His robes were blackened with burning incense and smeared in matted soot. His eyes held fevered intensity, white-hot with purpose. He lifted a leather scroll, bound with human hair and etched in blood, carrying the cursed psalm of hunger. Elias emerged from the shadows, blade drawn, cloak trailing embers. He could hear the last hum of guttural voices trapped deep beneath the fallen stones, echoes of the fleshless choir. Elias nodded, voice low and calm. "We are two sides of the same psalm, hunter. Save your blade. This ends only in song or flame." Around them, fragments of corpses and ash drifted downward like cursed snow. The candle at the altar guttered again. Sparks felt distant, as though sacred things had abandoned the chapel. Elias' stomach churned. "You butchered these men and women to bind a dead spirit. Their flesh closes holes in your ritual, victims in a cathedral's name." Elias smiled, the flash of fanatic conviction shining pale. "They volunteered for sanctification. Each voice is a thread, each psalm a chain." He unrolled the scroll, exposing symbols and fragments of the gospel bound in their flesh. He began to chant, "We seek him in marrow. We find him in bone. For psalm without flesh must feast alone." As the words spilled out, walls groaned. The floor trembled. A distant rumble, like the weight of a sleeping god, shook the rafters. Elias watched the candle's flame bow toward Elias, reverence and terror entwined. He pressed forward. "I will end this." His hand gripped the blade so tightly his fingers creaked. He sealed his throat with a breath. "Sing it, or let it burn." Elias didn't hesitate. He held the scroll aloft and resumed, voice clear and unwavering. "By sickle of steel and deathed him. By dust of bone and faith grown dim, we hold him captive, night and flame. Keep spirit bound, bear silences, name." Each verse sounded like iron across the stone. Shadows coalesced. A shape rose behind Elias, a flicker of robed form bending in recognition. Elias's gut seized. The cathedral floor hummed beneath their feet. He demanded, voice steady, "Will you stop? Will you confess or burn?" Elias paused. There was something savage in his gaze, the calm of a man at war with his humanity. He lowered the scroll. "I have no voice without this psalm, but without it, this thing rises." Elias's vision sharpened. He saw bones beneath the altar's rubble. Each fragment was part of the murdered choir, strung into an ancient malison. The psalm's words were thaumaturgy, chains of word and flesh that kept a godless presence bound beneath. Ash drifted downward as a growl rumbled beneath the chapel's marble. The candle extinguished, the single arc of moonlight sharpened. Elias raised his blade. "Then we bind it differently." Troweling his throat, he recited, voice steady and cold, by Sigmar's flame and justice's breath. "Speak silence to the mouth of death. Break flesh form prayer of darkest kin. Steel psalm in flame. Let truth begin." In response, Elias stumbled, eyes widening. His scroll cracked, ancient skin flaking from the edges as if recoiling. The distant tremor became a quake. Stone shook underfoot. Elias fell to his knees, voice shaking. "Stop, no." Elias stabbed the psalm scroll through the flame. Fire roared, knotting dread. He pressed his hand to Elias's shoulder. "You made it possible to bind once. I end it now." He shoved Elias away and kicked the charred scroll forward. The fire roared, rising up the altar stones. Flames surged over fallen wood and rubble, crackling upward like hungry tongues. Stone cracked. The heat increased. A low roar sounded, hollow, pulsing. With a final scream, the chanting walls tore themselves apart. From below, a shout of despair echoed through the crypt. Bone rattled. Elias seized Ilian, hauled him toward the nave. They burst through the rubble. The ceiling above them collapsed in sparks, embers rain. He cut the ropes holding the bell. The brass gong fell. It rang 11 times, each peal a death knell, then shattered the hidden specter's bonds, even as the inferno spread behind them. Her father then introduced himself and asked if there was any news. They reached the cloisters where Annika waited, watching the fire like halos dancing through her solemn face. Elias stood in the glowing haze. Iliam lay ligatured, slack with exhaustion and terror. Flames roared behind them. At dawn only embers remained in the chapel. The psalm's words lay blank on blackened stone. The abbey walls were charred but unbroken. Elias turned toward the rising sun, gaze steady, voice harsh. We bound the song in smoke and steel. Let no one sing it again. He stepped away, carrying Ilian and a single blackened page. Sigmar's justice red in its edges. Because though the psalm was silenced, the price paid in bodies would echo through every stone of Krovenheim, and the judgment had been sung. Chapter 15. The ashes sing still. The dawn broke in a wash of pale gray over the ruins of Krovenheim Abbey, its quiet light failing to soften the devastation. Parchment and timber smoldered, and charred echoes whispered through the collapsed nave. Pillars, once proud and carved with sanctified symbols, lay fractured and scorched. Embers drifted down like falling dew from a world beyond death. Elias Krieg stepped between blackened benches, eyes locked on the rising smoke that framed the sky. Every footfall echoed in the gutted sanctuary, each snap of splintered wood and crack of settling stone a cruel counterpoint to the chant that still haunted his ears, the murder psalm. It hummed faintly in the distance, as though the wind itself carried the psalm's bones through the mist. At his side, Annika carried the broken hilt of Sigmarite steel she'd salvaged from the altar, its blade molten, the runic bloodline still glowing faintly red. She offered no words, only a look carved from sorrow and determination, as though she knew the cost yet still walked beside him. They passed the ruins of the stone lectern. One fallen shard bore the smudged remnants of Enoch's gospel. The cursed tome was gone. Taken or burned, he did not know, but its absence left a vacuum, weighed by dread. A single scorched leaf lay near the base, curling inward as though trying to swallow itself whole. Outside, the day smelled of ash and rain, dank and dreadful. The cloister gardens lay flattened. Broken statues of saints lay belly up in mud, their faces cracked, limbs missing. Ivy crawled into blasted niches, reclaiming desecration with tenacious green. And over all, a pale mist wove between fractured walls, carrying a distant refrain of the psalm he had ended in fire. Elias paused upon the shattered threshold. He closed his eyes. The silence should have been an end, but even without stone walls to hold it, the psalm still found the cracks in the world. From the smoldering west wing a figure emerged, Brother Ilian, bound in charred rope, eyes hollow, posture bowed by guilt and flame. He stumbled forward, each step punctuated by the soft echo. He cradled something in his hand, a single page, blackened but intact, etched with blood-dusted ink. Elias watched but did not move. Annika slid to stand behind him. Iliam halted, head bowed. His voice, raw and trembling, broke the hush. It bleeds still. He uncurled his hand, revealing a shard of charred parchment, the final verse of the murder psalm. Portions were smeared with blood, others obscured by flame, but the killer lines remained legible. And when his body rests, the song shall take his flesh, where voices buried deep shall never sleep. The wind caught Ilian's voice and carried it into the ruins, a broken, final prophecy. Elias took a step forward and snatched the parchment. His fingertips brushed corrupted ink. He folded the page and tucked it away. His jaw clenched. He tasted copper on his tongue, not from blood, but from fate. Around them, the smoke thinned. The psalm rattled through broken tracery like skeletal whispers escaping their cages. The ruins seemed to breathe. Each ember snapped and snapped anew, like dying flames refusing to release their souls. Ilian fell to his knees on cold earth. "It's not silence," he croaked. "It lives in the wind, in the broken stone, in the world's memory." Elias knelt to Ilian's side. He pressed a hand to the bound monk's skull, gentle but unyielding. "We ended it with fire. The psalm's words cannot stand in living flesh, only burned shadows." He looked skyward. Above, ravens wheeled in etched patterns, their cries ragged and mocking, echoes of the psalm's final refrain. Elias rose, brushing ash from his cloak. "This place will stand or fall," he said, voice steady as steel's edge. "But so long as I breathe, no voice of repentance or malice, will sing a bound psalm again." He turned away from the ruins. Morning's pale light accentuated the warping stones, the scarred walls. Behind them, war horses waited. Annika moved to his side, shoulders squared, eyes intent on a distant horizon. Elias mounted. As he settled into the saddle, he drew the parchment of the murder psalm sheet from his coat, trailing it between his fingers. He released it to the wind. The paper fluttered, tattered. It drifted forward, snagged by swirling ash, and then tore apart, carried beyond their sight. His horse stirred. He spoke once, to the wind, to the ruins, to the echoing psalm burning in memory. "Rest now. From stone or roar, you are unmade." He released the reins. Dawn cracked the clouds in half. Morning sun touched the horizon with gold. He rode away, the ashes of Krovenheim slipping into mist, and the psalm, if it sang still, was no longer his to hear. But the wind carried warnings of the next chapter, echoes of blood-stained verses waiting for new ears. And Elias Krieg, scarred by psalm and steel, rode forward, ready for the silence before the next storm.